My name is Lee Holt. I'm with the Space Coast Transportation Planning Organization. Although I will be the one up here in front of you talking, along with Chris Sinclair from Renaissance Planning Group. There are a lot of people on the team. Events like this are a team sport, so I would first ask all of the Space Coast Transportation Organization staff to please stand. I know they're over there working, so staff, please stand. So these are the folks that can help you if you need something. And then we have several folks here from Renaissance Planning Group. I'm going to ask them to stand for a minute so you'll know who they are. This is our technical team, so they'll be the ones that can answer the questions that we can't answer. We are working on our long-range transportation plan. And if you look up here, it says Space Coast 2040 LRTP. Isn't that awful? We start off with an acronym that nobody knows what it means. So, LRTP stands for Long Range Transportation Plan. If you catch us with some letters that we don't define during this presentation, raise your hand and we will give you a water bottle because you are alert today. So we are trying really hard to not speak transportation. We're trying to speak so that you can understand what we're talking about. And that's one of the ways we do it, is by rewarding you for catching us. The other thing is we are going to ask for your input. This is a planning process that needs you to give us feedback. So if you provide feedback at the end of the meeting over here where you registered, you will get a brain. So that you can, because we're just going to tax your brain today. You may need a little bit more brain matter when you go back to work. So we'll give you some to take with you. The 2040 Long-Range Transportation Plan is, first of all, a core function of transportation planning. And that may seem like a long way off in the future, but we actually have a budget out for 20 years. So it's really not that far off. It is required by law that we update our plan every 5 years. All federal funding is directed by this plan. So if the projects are not in this plan, we can't build them. And we are required by law to involve the public in the process. So we thank you very much for being here today. We've been working on this for quite some time. We've had several gatherings and opportunities for the community to provide input. We started in the spring of 2013. We conducted an online public survey and we got several thousand responses to that. Florida Today covered it a couple different times and people would go online and fill out the survey. We started with a symposium in the fall of 2013 where we had the cities come and say, this is what we're going to be doing in the future. Because another thing that's required by law is that this transportation plan be in sync with the city's comprehensive plans. So our consulting team looked at the comprehensive plans, but we had the cities come and tell us what their visions were. From that, we developed scenarios, and we had folks come back and look at those at the end of 2014. Then we had our vision workshop. Oh, no, that was in January of 2014. Then we had our vision workshop last summer, and then the TPO board adopted the vision and the vision map in the fall. And now what we've done is we've taken that, so I was just explaining to someone else, it's like a funnel. We started with, here's what we have, who do we want to be when we grow up in 2040? And we took the input from that and we developed some ideas, and then from that we narrowed it down a little more, and we developed some goals, and now we're all the way down today to the corridors, some actual roads if this is our vision, how are we going to get there? Literally and figuratively, how are we going to get there?
And then the next step is
we'll actually budget some dollars on some projects, and that will happen in July. We'll be inviting you back in July of this year, and then the TPO board will adopt this long-range transportation plan in the fall. So, of course, we started with the baseline, the current trend. And this is what we looked like in 1960. The red is are the areas that were developed. And then in 2010, we looked like this. And if we keep going, this is what we'll look like in 2030. And then in 2060, there's not much grain left. And that is if we continue to do what we're doing now. If you do what you've always done, you're going to get what you've always got. So that's where we started. Then, through our survey and through some polling of our board and our committee, we came up with some common strategies. First of all, clearly economic prosperity is important to all of us. We presented the population projections that show that we're going to grow to over 1 million people. And we looked at transportation. And remember now, we were doing this in 2013, and some things were already percolating in the community. First of all, there was redevelopment of all of our ports. When we say port, most people immediately go to Port Canaveral, which is clearly an important port. And they were beginning to plan for growing from a cruise port to a cruise and cargo port. But we have an airport that was redeveloping and becoming an aerospace hub. We have Kennedy Space Center, which in statute is now called Canaveral Spaceport, and it is being developed into a commercial space center from the traditional shuttle NASA program. So when we say port centers, we're talking about all the ports that we have. And then we have some common concerns that came out. International trade, there was a lot of talk then and now about the widening of the Panama Canal and how we can gain from that. There's a shift from traditional space to commercial space. So those things that were strategies were also concerns. At the time we started, gas prices were very, very high, and so there was a lot of concern about energy, and people were driving less, and gas tax revenue was going down. Some of those things have changed a little bit, but there's still concerns. Weather and climate change were a concern, and we're an aging population. Florida more than other places around the country. Our average age is a little higher than some other places. So those were some of the global ideas that came out. So from that, there were 3 ideas that emerged. First of all, we have these port centers. We should focus on them and help them to thrive. We are the only place in the world, and we say this every meeting, we're the only place in the world that is quintimodal. We have road, rail, air, sea, and space. No one else has that. We are a high-tech economy. It started with the Space Center, and Harris has been here for a long time, but our Economic Development Commission is constantly citing the lists that we're on, the national lists. We have, more engineers per capita. We have all these high-tech jobs. We're recruiting high-tech companies. We're right up there with Austin, Texas, and Silicon Valley, in our high-tech jobs. So that is another thing that we need to support and continue with our transportation plan. And then finally, we want connected communities. We, as a community, vote to preserve our natural spaces. We have the Environmentally Endangered Lands Program. We live here because we love what we have and our quality of life, and we want to preserve that. And we're already moving in that direction to some degree with the Complete Streets program that we're doing in the downtown areas. All of the cities just about talked about revitalization and making their communities more walkable and bikeable. So we want to build on that. So when we took those 4 scenarios, the current trend, port centers, high-tech lifestyle, connected communities, then we came back and we asked folks, all right, which one of those is best for positioning Brevard for economic prosperity? And you told us it was port centers and high-tech lifestyle. Which one helps us address our population growth? Clearly, it's connected communities. Which one helps us protect our natural environment? And folks chose both the high-tech lifestyle and the connected communities. And finally, let's make it personal. Which one is best for meeting the way I want to live and travel in the future? And notice that the current trend went up a little bit from the other 3, because I still want to drive my car. But overall, everybody agreed that all 3 of the new scenarios were better at addressing how I want to live in the future than the current trend. So, it's no surprise that these are the vision goals that came out of all that work. We want to leverage what is uniquely Brevard's by investing in our port centers and continuing our high-tech focus. We want to preserve what is uniquely Brevard by creating more compact communities and having a little bit less reliance on auto. And we want to provide more community travel choices with a wider variety of housing and more travel options. Those are the goals that we presented to the community and then to the Transportation Planning Organization committees and to the board. They adopted those last fall with a vote of the board, along with the vision map, at which you can see targets some the port areas, and now we're getting down to how do we connect the thing? How do we connect those dots? That's the role of transportation in that scenario. So this is what we want to be as a community. What is transportation's role in that? And that got us to this vision map. So that's the background of how we got where we are. I'm going to call on Chris Sinclair to come up, and he is going to cover the technical information that's come about since this was adopted. What I want to say is this is very technical information that he's going to present, but we want to make sure that you are with us because we're going to ask you to look at these maps, and there is a lot on these maps, and to comment on them. So we're going to try really hard to explain what all these things mean so that when you're looking at them, you can be clear as to what you're seeing and you can comment on them. So, any acronyms? Okay, you're up.
Okay. So I have a feeling this water bottle's going to go out. But I will do my best. All right, and I will, even though there is a geek in me, I will do my best to to make this translation as palatable as possible. The vision map was our guide. It identified not only places where we wanted to get to, but also the kinds of connections, as Lee said, that we wanted to make. So we identified 10 key corridors in the county. And then what we did was we started figuring out on those key corridors, how could transit be introduced into those corridors? How could walkable, bikeable communities be introduced into those corridors? How could all of these corridors connect together? What you're seeing up on the map is the connection between the vision map and the corridors that we came up with. You're seeing a lot of circles on those maps, and I'll talk about those circles in just a minute. But these are the 10 corridors that you'll be focusing in on after I finish speaking. So just in terms of the planning that we did to get to these maps and these concepts, first of all, we still have to factor in highway level service and what happens on the roadways out there. So just to give you a sense, you're going to see on these graphics different levels service, LOS measures. It's just like school. If you get an A, you're doing well. If you get an F, you're not doing so well. And then there's a grade in between the three, A, B, C, D, E, and F. The county is typically shooting for about a D or an E in terms of where the traffic needs to be. But since you all have experienced each of these conditions in the county, I think you know what they represent. And speaking of that, here's some level service differences in the county. So you've got level service on Max Brewer Bridge, and then you can see Wickham and Morrell, and not doing so well. But there is a roadway component to what we're doing, but there's also a multimodal component to it. When I say multimodal, what I'm talking about is travel by conveyances other than automobiles. I'm talking about walking, I'm talking about biking, I'm talking about using transit. And luckily, the Florida Department of Transportation has put together a multimodal design guideline concept. It's a set of design guidelines in terms of this is the kinds of stuff you need to have in place in order to have multimodal corridors and communities. And so we relied heavily on that as we were looking at what we're going to do with each of these corridors and how we're going to look at each of these corridors. And it all begins, I just want to emphasize this point more than anything else, it all begins with walking and biking. If you can get people walking and biking, not only does it create more vibrant communities, but it reduces auto travel, which then has an impact of reducing or improving levels of service. It makes transit more viable, because if you're walking to begin with, transit becomes, if you want to get to that destination that's beyond the walk shed, you can use transit to do that, and you feel comfortable that when you get to that destination, you can get off the transit vehicle and actually walk to the destination you need to get to within a reasonable amount of time. So it begins and ends with walkable communities. What's interesting about Brevard County is you already have these things. This is not a new concept. Back in the day when the FEC was the only conveyance, the only way to get in and out of the county, there were trains before cars came along. There were train stations in Titusville, Cocoa, Melbourne. And if you notice the development footprints in each of those areas, very walkable because of that. That was the only way to get around once you get off the train. So it's not something that's completely new to Brevard. These communities exist in Brevard County. I'm going to talk specifically about two types of transit. There's other options, but the two types that seem to be the most viable here in Brevard County over the long term are commuter rail. The most obvious example for us here is the Sunrail. How many have ridden the Sunrail system over in Orlando? A few of you have. Tri-Rail down in South Florida is another example. And then you've got bus rapid transit. And this is something that's fairly new and unique in terms of transit, but it's a way of taking buses that are out there and giving them some sort of competitive edge. It's not your typical fixed bus transit kind of route. It's got something that makes it unique in terms of how it operates. And I'll get into the details of that in just a minute. Actually, we have two bus rapid transit systems here. One over the limo system, if anybody's been on the limo system in downtown Orlando. And then one of the oldest bus rapid transit systems is the US 1 Miami corridor, south of downtown Miami. Okay. As I said before, it all begins with walking and biking. So that means you want to cluster and mix land uses. People tend to not want to walk more than a half a mile, preferably. They want to get to destinations within a quarter mile, and that's the key here. Do I have adequate destinations within that quarter or half a mile? So you really need to think about clustering of land uses and getting destinations close to origins within these places. Lee already mentioned complete streets and the need to make the pedestrian environment feel comfortable and inviting, and that's actively happening within the county. And then, as I said before, this is the walking part of the trip is that first mile for transit. So it gets you to the transit vehicle if you have destinations that are beyond your walk shed within a particular area. And in order to make transit work successfully, the ability to walk is pretty important. So I've already talked about this to a certain extent. You want to get as many destinations within a quarter and a half mile of where you are as you possibly can. So you've got, in the vision map, we identified several types of walking and biking communities. One are regional, and they can be served by either bus rapid transit or by commuter rail access. Higher densities here, these are sort of 4 places, such as downtown Titusville, Cocoa, and Melbourne. And then you have neighborhood sized hubs, communities, walking and biking communities, not quite as intense as the regional hubs, more residential in character, also can be served by either bus rapid transit or commuter rail. And then really not a walkable community, but very important are the intermodal hubs in the county. And Lee set that up pretty well earlier, talked about the seaport, talked about both airports as well as the spaceport. And here, the trick is to get people into those places as easily as you can and have them transfer to other modes to get to where they want to go. And then transit sort of knits it all together. Remember, Lee was talking about connected communities. Well, the connection, if you want a non-auto connection beyond that walkable community, you've got to think about transit and what kinds of transit that you can provide. And I've already mentioned bus rapid transit. Buses are either operating in their own separate right-of-way, and you can see that in that top picture. They've got their own lanes that they're using as they're going down the corridor. You want to have stations spaced so you can optimize the operations of transit. Typically, it's about a half mile to a mile apart. There are variations to bus rapid transit. Not always do you have to have an exclusive lane. You can have lanes where the bus actually gets out of the traffic. It could be in with the traffic until it gets to an intersection. And then it gets out of traffic to get around the queue up at that intersection to be on its way. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to get the bus to have a competitive edge with automobiles as it's moving down a corridor. So that's the key to bus rapid transit. The typical right-of-way that's needed for bus rapid transit is about 30 feet. So 2 traffic lanes is what you need. And you need about 50 feet at stations, just to give you a sense of that. And I'm going through some of these technical details because you're going to see on these corridor diagrams that we put together how we've sort of laid in the bus rapid transit within the right-of-way of each of these corridors. So you've got the station areas themselves, and when I talk about stations, I'm talking about not just a station, but that quarter-mile, half-mile walkable area around the station. You've got to pay attention to that and what you can get to. So here's an illustration of a regional bus rapid transit station, and you can see some of the development that's going on around that station. Here's more of a neighborhood bus rapid transit station where the densities aren't quite as high as the previous picture, but you clearly got the station as a focal point for that walkable area. Commuter rail, just quickly get through that. Commuter rail is locomotives that are actually driven by electric engines, but diesel sort of powers those electric engines. They can run on existing freight rail tracks, so you've got a very nice freight rail track going right through Brevard County, the LEC track. Stations typically are spaced a few miles apart for operations purposes, and then service is oriented toward the peak hours. And if you look at the Sunrail station, you can see that, Sunrail system. This is an example of a commuter rail stop in Denver. And you can see this is a regional station that's got fairly high intensities around the the station itself. And then this is a more of a neighborhood type station area where the train's coming in and you've got lower density development around that particular station. So those are the flavors that we've identified in terms of both the walkable areas and the transit connections between those areas. Something to always keep in mind is the fact that technology is evolving quickly. We were talking about it in the fog coming over here this morning. Would it be nice if the car could drive us rather than us having to drive over here? So we've got to consider that possibility of cars driving themselves. How's that going to impact how we get around by automobiles? So there's a lot of thinking that needs to happen on that front. So we've got to be factoring that into our thinking in terms of other technologies and how not only they impact transit, but automobiles as well. So we put together quarter plans. Like I said, we identified 10 quarters that we thought were critically important in terms of the vision plan and making it become reality. The information that we're presenting on each of these boards out here goes out to the year 2060, so we're getting way out, almost 50 years out to the future. A lot can happen in 50 years. For those of you who are 50 years or older, which includes me, I remember back to when I was a kid and how where I grew up has changed. And so just if you can keep that in mind, for those of you over 50, a lot does change over 50 years. So what we're doing through this process is sort of not addressing what happens tomorrow, but addressing what happens in the longer term and making sure that the TPO and the county are setting themselves up for the right possibilities in the future. So those are the quarters that we're looking at. US 1 is the backbone of this entire system, and it's a very, very intriguing quarter for a number of reasons. It goes, the way we've defined it, it goes all the way from MIMS on the north to MICO on the south. And what's interesting about it is this is what initially connected communities in Brevard County. It was the FEC, and that was pretty much it. You had those train depots that we talked about. There's no mistake that those train stations were spaced the way they were. It was to, not only the operations of the train service, but you had your little market sheds for each of the station areas. Around those station areas, very walkable communities that still exist today. So you've got all of that infrastructure and all that template is sitting there that just needs to get revitalized. So the opportunities here, you start with those walkable communities and you augment those walkable communities with new stations and station areas, walkable station areas up and down the line. Bus rapid transit could serve the entire quarter or portions of the quarter, and what we're talking about here is being able to go from, let's say, Tim and I were talking about Palm Bay up to Melbourne. You could hop on in the BRT in Palm Bay, take a ride up to Melbourne and get into Melbourne, or vice versa. So that's the BRT. It's intended to be a feeder service for the bigger improvement, which is commuter rail. Commuter rail, again, would extend all the way from MIMS to MICO. It's about 60 miles. Using typical station spacing, that's about 13 stations, which is about average 5 miles spacing between each of the stations. It's very similar in length to the Sunrail system once it gets fully built out, as well as the Tri-Rail system down in South Florida. And the thought here, it would use the FEC trackage in order to make that happen. One thing I need to say about that, this is not a new concept. All Aboard Florida is actively building their system. Initially, it's going from Miami up to West Palm Beach, but they will extend it, we think, up to Orlando. Down in South Florida, what they're doing, recognizing, all Aboard Florida people are recognizing that they can get better ridership if they've got good feeder service into their system. Remember, they're going to have stops in Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and Palm Beach only. And there's a lot more people down in South Florida that can feed into their system. If they've got good transit service, they're working with District 4, FDOT District 4, Department of Transportation. District 4. To put in parallel commuter service that has more frequent stops that can help feed people such as people that are in Delray who want to go north or south, they could feed into the Palm Beach station and eventually come into Orlando. So these things all hook in together. FEC is working with District 4 on that particular concept. So it's not something that's new or unique, and it's something that could happen up here in Brevard County. So there's not outside the realm of possibility in terms of what can happen here in Brevard County. This could work without all aboard Florida. I don't want it to sound like it depends on all aboard Florida to come into being. But the infrastructure is there. You've got walkable communities that support it, and you've got the rail infrastructure that's out there. And then you do have all aboard Florida, which does provide, if there is a stop, and the county, TPO, the county had been asked by all aboard Florida to look at locations for a stop here in Brevard County. If that connection is made, if that stop is put into Brevard County, then you certainly will have connections over to Orlando, South Florida. Ultimately, all aboard Florida will likely extend up to Jacksonville and over to Tampa. So now you've got this sort of interstate connection by transit via all aboard Florida. And well, I'll leave it at that. It's kind of an interesting possibility. But what's really fascinating about this corridor, all the ports that Lee was talking about, are all sort of tied into this corridor very easily. The spaceport may be the only connection that's not tied in real closely. So you start from the north, you got Tyco, which sits there right adjacent to this rail line. Then you come down the way, and this is not an easy connection, but it's a very possible connection over to Port Canaveral to the east, and then to Orlando International Airport to the west. Then you go south of that, a very easy connection between this particular corridor and Melbourne International Airport. So the potential for both rail, intercity rail, as well as air connections along this corridor is sitting there. It's all there, which is it's a real opportunity that you need to pay attention to. All right, so that's the US 1 corridor. It is the backbone for this entire system. But there are other corridors that we need to pay attention to. The first is State Road 528. And gosh, Bob, how long have we been in this part of the world? 20 years? How long? 30 years. And how time flies when you're having fun. And ever since we've both been here, we've heard consistently port-to-port connections, port-to-port. This airport to Port Canaveral connections. Different technologies have been proposed, different ideas are proposed. The connection already exists. If you've been on the beach line, you've seen the buses go back and forth between the airport and Port Canaveral. So it's not like it's something that's not already being used. So the question is, how do you perfect that? A lot of people come in. I know you probably get a visit probably once every other year. I've got this great idea to connect the port to port. So right now it's, how do you perfect that connection? Well, the port has got some ideas about how to make that connection work. They would like to get passengers into the port from both Melbourne International Airport as well as Orlando International Airport. So they're a willing partner in terms of making that connection happen. Will it be commuter rail or some sort of rail technology? Will it be another kind of technology? That's to be seen, but we've got to think about how do you optimize that connection. The other thing that's interesting about this connection is it ties in with that potential all aboard Florida connection that sits right at 528 and the FEC. So a lot of things come together at that particular hub. So that's the 528 corridor. With the fact that all aboard Florida is perfecting the right-of-way between the airport and their station at US 1 is giving this idea legs that it didn't have before. I mean, that's a pretty significant improvement that's being made with private dollars, mostly private dollars. The other corridor is the 520 corridor just to the south. What we've got envisioned there is bus rapid transit that would go just from the west of I-95 all through downtown Cocoa, east into Merritt Island, and then finally over to Cocoa Beach on A1A. Ellis and NASA corridor is an interesting corridor. This is something that the Governor's Task Force looked at a few months back in terms of these regional rail connections. So this particular connection would be a commuter rail or something like that, but that would go from Orlando International Airport to Medical City. If anything happens on the Deseret Ranch, it would go through the middle of Deseret Ranch, come over to Vieira, drop down to the Ellis Road corridor, and no matter how you slice and dice it, the Ellis Road corridor is an extremely important economic development. as well as intermodal corridor for the county. So it needs to sort of anticipate possibilities such as this. And it ties into the high-tech cluster around the airport and then into the airport itself. And then eventually it could tie into the commuter rail on the FEC line. This corridor is probably a lot more tenuous. In fact, it is a lot more tenuous than the 528 corridor, but it's something that you've got to pay attention to, and as you're making improvements such as to Ellis, you've got to sort of factor this into your thinking. Do we need to save an envelope for something like this to happen on Ellis? So that's why it's on the map. Fisk and Stadium, I think, is a fairly important corridor because there's a lot of transit ridership along this corridor to begin with right now. This would actually tie into downtown Cocoa, come on 520, and then down Fisk and Stadium or St. Andrews to eventually come into the government center. BRT, bus rapid transit kind of corridor. Wickham and Minton sort of serves the central core area of the county. It would start at the government center, come down to Wickham, around Wickham, and then eventually tie down into, it would use Minton to get down to Malabar and then take Malabar over to the US 1 corridor to the east. Babcock is a very intriguing corridor because you got a lot of stuff going on Babcock right now. This corridor would extend from the airport on the north, through that job cluster to the south of the airport. Florida Institute of Technology is on this particular corridor. Harris is not far off. Then you've got the State College, Eastern State College. I keep wanting to call it Brevard Community College, but it's not that anymore. And then would eventually tie into Emerald City, which is the new center that's being proposed by Palm Bay in the southern part of the city. That's being designed to be a walkable community. If you look at design plans, it talks about bus rapid transit being an integral part of what's going on. And then last, but certainly not least, is State Road A1A. It would connect into a potential intermodal facility up at the port. So you can imagine somebody could get it off of the airplane at OIA, take the port-to-port connector, get off the port-to-port connector, get on the A1A BRT, bus rapid transit, and take it anywhere from the port all the way down. If they wanted to go as far south as Melbourne, they could do that on this particular improvement. So you've got, and then the port always talks about they have passengers coming in. They want to be able to entertain those passengers by letting them go to other places outside the port. So this could be that connection. And then it would sort of tie together all the things that happen on the A1A corridor. So it would be that kind of connection. So the question we're going to ask you today, the question that you're going to ponder as you walk around the room is, how much of this stuff do we want? How much multimodal do we want? So things you may want to think about as you're answering that question is how much travel choices are a core element of the plan, but how much of those choices do we want to provide? Because the more you invest in these walkable communities and make those happen, the more you invest in transit and make those happen, the more you're going to provide viable travel choices to people. So think about that as we go through this. Walking and biking and building the communities properly is key to this. I can't emphasize that enough. It all begins and ends first and last mile, and everything else depends on the ability to put these kinds of communities together. We're not talking about the entire community. We're talking about strategic places within the community. So I don't want this to sound like the whole county is going to turn into a walkable community. But it does, if you look at these places that we have highlighted on the map with these circles, it tells you strategically if you're going to build walkable, bikeable communities, these are the places you build these things. And so we need your reaction to that. And then the connecting the neighborhoods and the communities. And that's where transit, as I said before, transit comes into play. And I don't want to de-emphasize or pass over bicycles because I think they're a big part of that connection beyond the walkable community. So just to get a sense how much multimodal, we've got some ranges here just to give you a flavor of what we're talking about. The picture here on the left is transit supportive. It's a walkable community to a certain extent. You notice how the Walmart or the Walgreens still sitting there on the corner in the background. So we're not talking about a huge change in land uses along the border. So you've got that extreme. And then over on the right, you can see you've got more intensity and development going on. So that's the degree of land use that we're talking about in terms of multimodal. A lot of these corridors are being driven by bus rapid transit. And as I said before, you could dedicate a full lane to buses in this system, and that's the example on the right side of the screen. Or you could have more strategic interventions, and what you're seeing on the left part of the screen is the bus goes with traffic until it gets to the intersection and then gets into its queue jumping lane to get around that traffic and move forward. So there's a lot of variations and variety in terms of how you make bus rapid transit work. In terms of how much multimodal, think about how much people are going to shift when you make these improvements. Currently, there's about well over 90% of everybody who's making trips are using automobiles. If you make these moderate interventions, you can drop that down to about 82%. And then if you drop that down even further, you can drop it down to about 75% in terms of non-auto travel, which means the rest of the 25% would be using walking or transit. And a point that Lee made, and I'm going to make it again, is notice how still most people are getting around by automobiles. That's the reality of the situation. They could be high-tech automobiles, we don't know. But this is, even with the 25% non-auto share, that's a pretty aggressive non-auto share compared to where you are right now. But it's going to take some investments and some in both land uses as well as transportation. So this is, I'm not sure if I want to get into the details of this graph, but if you don't do anything on a theoretical roadway, the future congestion, this is a hypothetical, the future congestion could be 30% of all vehicles are congested. If you add lanes, you could probably take care of all of that congestion. If you add a low BRT investment, you still will likely have some congestion, but you are shifting people out of that congestion. You're providing people with the opportunity to avoid the congestion by using the bus rapid transit. So rather than having 30% of all vehicles congestion, maybe that drops down to about 12%. And the more investment you make in the land uses in the transit, you can drop that congestion level even further. So the easy solution here would be just to make roadway widening improvements, but you would not have any impact on how much people shift. You will likely still have congestion on roads if you invest in BRT and high BRT, low BRT or higher BRT. But the impacts of the congestion impacts will be less than you would otherwise would have had, and you will have those 15 to 25% shift in the non-auto mode. So keep that in mind as you're looking at some of these boards out there. So let me go through. We've got these boards around the room. Each of the 10 corridors is somewhere around this room, so you can take a look at what you want to see and focus in on. Let me go into what you're going to be looking at. First of all, on the very left side of each one of the boards is the location map that tells you where it is. It tells you the kinds of transit we're proposing, whether it's commuter rail or bus rapid transit. Darker blue is bus rapid transit, lighter blue is commuter rail. The circles that you see on this map, the dark circles are the stations themselves, the open circles are the station areas. It's a half-mile circle. These are by no means set in stone. They're based on station spacing criteria that we were using. It is anticipated that as these corridors get planned in more detail, a lot of working will happen with the cities in order to more properly locate where these stations ought to happen, where they think they should happen. So there will be a continuing discussion about that. So that's what you're seeing on the left. Then you're seeing the rights of way that are available with the existing rights of way that are available in each of the corridors. The US 1 corridor will include the FEC right of way, and one of the things I want to note about FEC is they've got a lot of right of way coming through Brevard County. We looked at what they typically need, I can't remember, Dave, is it 150 feet? What do they need for their 3 tracks?
No, it's only like 60 feet.
60 feet, yeah. So they need 60 feet for 3 tracks. And that's, from a rail operations perspective, you could get commuter rail, passenger rail, intercity rail, and freight rail in 3 tracks. That's a lot of capacity, okay? They have more than 60 feet for nearly the entire length of the county. So right of way is not an issue. So you'll see that on these maps. But when you get to the roads, it's not quite as pretty and nice. Some places you have more right of way than you need. Some places you have less. But what you're going to be paying attention to when you look at the right-of-way is we've identified what the future traffic will be on that particular corridor. And if it requires additional lanes, you'll see some red cross hatching to show the demand for those additional lanes in that particular section. And then you're going to see the blue bands going along as well. And that shows bus rapid transit and the demand it will have for additional lanes. And when you see the blue and the red sort of overlap, you can see places where the two are competing for that right-of-way capacity. So pay attention to the demands and how those demands sort of line up with the existing right-of-way that's out there. The next thing is, this is the future demand. This is an estimation by 2060. How many people are living right now in that half-mile station area? And so you're going to see these donut charts inside each one of those different circles. Each one of those is a different place along the corridor. The lighter pink tells you how much stuff is already there. That's jobs and people that are there. We call them activity units to be really technical about it. The entire circle represents what FDOT, Florida Department of Transportation, says you need to have to support good transit. If that circle is got a lot of gray in it, then right now, well, before I get to the gray, so the pink indicates what's there now. The red, the darker red, indicates what's going to be there in the future based on forecasts. The gray indicates what still remains in terms of capacity that needs to be used up. So that gives you a pretty good indication. This particular quarter, I believe this is at the, I'm not sure where this is, but this doesn't have a whole lot of red or pink on it. You're going to see places where you've already got a lot of red and pink, which means you've got what it takes to support transit within the quarter. So pay attention to that. And then the two bars on the right side of that, the left bar indicates existing traffic volumes, and you're going to see some different colors and letters in that particular band. The band sort of goes out and comes back in depending on traffic volumes. So that defines the width of the band. The yellow indicates, like on this one, the yellow indicates a level service C, which is acceptable. The F is a level service F, which is not acceptable, and that's how we made the determination about future lanes. On the right side of that is what the future travel demand will be in volume and then level service. That was used to go back and figure out what kind of impacts it would have on the needed lanes and comparing it back to the right-of-way that was available. So that's how you read these charts and maps, and we'll have our people at each station answering questions that you may have. And so I think
Okay, so see, it's pretty technical, but it's really, really interesting when you start to look at it. So here is what we're asking you to do. We're going to do an exercise, and we're going to ask you to go to the stations and look at the maps. And we've been really careful. When early on people were going, you're going to take my car away from me. What about my single family home with my two-car garage? That's not going away. In fact, if you look at this, you see the status quo, the red on the left. That's the number of people driving cars today. We've got this tiny little sliver of people walking, biking, and taking transit. In the middle is sort of the lowest level of transit that we're suggesting. The red is the people in their cars, the brown is the people using transit, and the green is the folks walking and biking. So we're suggesting that we're going to add some transit and more people get to walk and bike. And then in the final, if we went with the Cadillac, or the train, not a Cadillac, getting rid of it, we're doing less cars, more transit. If we go all the way, we still have 75% of the people driving their cars. But look how much more green we have to walk and bike and a little bit more transit. So that's sort of the spectrum of options into 2040. Okay? So at each station, there are little sheets like this for that particular corridor. And we want you to go to the stations, to those quarters, and say, well, for me, in this quarter, it's a low priority, or it's a high priority. So check one of the boxes. And let me tell you how I did this so that it makes sense. If you take your hand out and you turn to pages 4 and 5, this is the way I did it. I looked at this and I said, okay, in 2040, I'm going to be 80-something. And I live in Saddle Lake Beach. So right now, where I live, I can't ride my bike to the grocery store. I can't go to Publix because it's not safe. There's no sidewalk to get there. I can't, it's a little too far to walk, but I can absolutely ride a bike if I felt safe. And think about it, most people, a lot of people drive 1 mile. A lot of their trips are 1 mile. If you think about at O'Galley and Riverside, there were tons of people that walked to the grocery store until Publix moved across the street. And now all those people get in their cars and drive to Publix because they're afraid to cross O'Galley. So if we make it more walkable and bikeable, I can go to the grocery store, I can go to Walgreens and pick up my prescriptions. A lot of the things that I would do as a retiree in my 80s, I could do on a bicycle. And I'd be healthier for it than getting in my car to go do it. But if I look at this, I am going to be in a neighborhood multimodal hub because it's a little small orange dot. And we will probably have neighborhood bus rapid transit where I live. So I can look over on page 5 and I can say, oh, okay, I'm going to be in a neighborhood center and this is what it looks like. I could do that. I could ride my bike to that station and go over to Vera where I used to work, which is a regional multimodal hub, and I can testify at the county commission meetings about what I don't like. Or I can show up at the 3,000 LRTP workshops and say, I still need a crosswalk. That's what I can do when I'm 80. So I looked at it for me, personally, how does this relate to me? So that sort of gives you a sense of. The other thing that was really interesting to me is, he talked about the quarters and what it looks like now and all that. What was really amazing to me is the number of circles where we already have what we need to support this vision. And it was very clear to me that there are circles that are red all the way around. And those would be the first places we would have some sort of stations. That makes sense to me. And then when you look at the future and you see, oh look, it's a big F. We can't do it the way we've always done it. On his little chart he goes, if we just add lanes, we can take care of all of this. But then US 1, we're gonna buy it'll be 12 or 14 lanes, and we'll have a lot of right-of-way expense to buy all the businesses that are already there and knock them down and have the number of lanes we need to accommodate all the people. So as you look at, do we want the status quo, look at the Fs, look at where the Ds and Fs already are, because those are the places that need more immediate responses. So, you've got your voting sheets at each station. We're going to ask you to go to those stations, and 2 things. There is a sheet to vote, but there are also sticky notes. So if you have particular questions about anything on the map, like how do the emergency vehicles get past all those trains? That's my question. It's a question we're hearing right now as we discuss all aboard Florida and the traffic getting across it. So go ahead and ask those questions. Stick a post-it right on there. That would be great. So we want to get those questions out so that we can look at how to answer them. But we really need you to do one of these forms at as many stations as you choose to go to. And then, I've learned that in transportation, you always talk south to north. That totally doesn't make sense to me, but that's what DOT says that you're supposed to do. So you talk south to north, even though we read from top to bottom. So we're going south to north this way. So in that corner over there is our two corridors, Babcock Street and the Wickham-Menton corridor are over there. Back here is the I-95 Ellis Road corridor and the Fisk Boulevard and Stadium corridor. Over here, we have 520 and 528 at that station in the back corner. And then we have our north-south corridors here, A1A, and then all three segments of US 1 are here. It's actually in three parts, north, central, and south, but they're together up here. So I would ask that everyone at some point in the morning try to visit the north-south corridors, especially US 1, because it is the spine that connects all the others together. But each of you lives and works in a particular place, and you know those corridors because you use them on a regular basis. And think out in the future, what do you want for yourself at 80 or however old you will be? And what do you want for your children and your grandchildren in that future? And what do we need in order to accomplish those objectives of connecting our port centers, being the high-tech community that we have the potential to be, and living in a wonderful place where we're walking and biking and enjoying our natural resources? What do these corridors need to do to accomplish those three goals? Okay, everybody ready? We will not reconvene. This is at your own pace. So I want to say,
Don't forget the brains on the way out, the survey.
don't forget to do your final evaluation over here and get your brain. See, I lost my brain. I need to get one up now. And then you do your final evaluation as you're leaving here to get your brain. Thank you, Stephen, for pointing that out. We will not reconvene. This is at your own pace, so it blocked your whole morning. We know how to get great reviews. That's to let you out early. So please enjoy the morning. We will be here. We have folks at every station to answer your question. We know it's technical, but put it in your own perspective, and I think it'll all make sense. Thank you very, very much for coming. I want you to know that we will reconvene in July. It will be an early morning meeting across the way, and we will actually have dollars with projects at that point, and it will be the last time we meet before we adopt the plan. So your input today is incredibly important. Thank you very much for coming.